County Seat, I'm your host, Chad Booth. Today we are talking about wild or feral horses. You know, there are some 43,000 of them in holding pens right now, and if they bring the range size down to an appropriate level, we'll be looking at 70-some-odd thousand horses additional. They cost $20,000 a piece to keep. That's $1.2 billion we currently owe, and it'll double if we bring more into pasture. How do you solve the problem? That's our show today. Let's learn a little bit more about wild horses to start.
When we think about wild horses on the range, images like this one usually come to mind. However, the reality is much harsher. Images like this show the true plight of wild horse herds in the western United States. In 2014, there were roughly 3,000 wild horses and burros in Utah and about 33,000 nationwide. Fast forward to this year, and there are now 5,000 in Utah and 72,000 on ranges across the country. According to the rules set out in the Wild Free-Roaming Horse and Burro Act of 1971, federal agencies were to manage wild herds while maintaining a thriving ecological balance and multiple-use relationship. At that time, the sustainable number was estimated to be around 25,000 animals, roughly a third of what the population is now, and the numbers just continue to grow.
The horses don't have much in the way of natural controls on their numbers, other than through starvation and dehydration. And that doesn't occur until after the rangeland resources have been depleted. And it's a pretty slow and ugly death for the horses involved.
Currently, 46,000 horses and burros are living in BLM holding facilities. The cost to maintain that number uses roughly 2/3 of the horse and burro program budget, a cost estimated at $50 million. This is why the National Wild Horse and Burro Summit was held in Salt Lake City recently. A solution needs to be found before the cost becomes too much for the BLM to handle, before rangelands are decimated, and before the horses breed themselves into oblivion.
That's why I'm here today, is to participate in these conversations and see if we can help drive some ideas and some solutions that will really help us tackle the overpopulation of wild horses and burros and produce healthy rangelands.
In today's panel discussion, we'll focus on the options presented at the Horse and Burro Summit and ask what lawmakers need to do to help fix this ongoing problem. For the County Seat, I'm Malia Stringham.
Thanks, Malia. The Horse and Burro Summit has yielded some very good information and some very interesting speakers. We are going to talk to 4 of them when we come back on the County Seat.
There is a place where looking out means looking in, where an impression lasting only a few seconds will be imprinted on a life forever, where courage is forged and innocence rediscovered, where remembering is rewarding and forgetting unforgettable. There is a place where truth is felt and where seeing is believing. There is a place.
Too often we find ourselves in shoes like these, or these. Wouldn't it be nice to change into something more like this, or this? How about these? Put on whatever shoes you prefer and come to Beaver County. We have exactly the adventure you need to put under them. So the next time you want to change out of these, come to Beaver County where you can jump into a pair of these. Beaver County, Utah. Lace up for adventure.
All local products have a story of magical places, real people, and delicious recipes spanning generations. So go ahead and discover. flavors you've never tasted, and friends you never knew you had. Utah's own. Discover local food.
Welcome back to the county seat. We are doing an update on wild horses and burros because of the recent summit in Salt Lake City. Joining us for this part of the conversation is John Ruhs, who is the acting deputy director of operations for the BLM, a transplant, I guess, for the time being to Washington, D.C. Thank you for joining us. We have J.J. Goycochea, who is a veteran of our show, the Nevada State veterinarian, and the chair of the County Commission for Eureka County in Nevada, and Eric Thacker, who's assistant professor at Utah State University, and you are also the range specialist, which gives us a great array here to get into a conversation. So I've noticed in this summit, because there have been other horse and burro events that we've gone to as the county seat over the years, that this one has some difference in it. There are a lot of changes in motion. Most notably changes in the range conditions, changes in the herds and herd populations, and it seems like there's a change in policy, or at least how the federal government is acknowledging what's going on with the horses that publicly has not ever shown up before. So that's what I would like to focus this on. I think it's probably most important to start with the range issues. So Eric, if we could just talk to you for just a second. Let's talk about what conditions have changed on the range.
So the wild horse and burro problem's not a new problem. We've kind of reached a point, a lot of people are referring to it as a breaking point. Wild horses are at the highest population they've ever been. In certain parts of the range, we've experienced some pretty dramatic drought over the last few years, which exacerbates the range condition even worse. And so it's reached kind of a point where people are concerned that that we've kind of reached a breaking point, that something needs to be done now because of the range condition. In a lot of areas, we've already crossed what a lot of people would call an ecological threshold, meaning even if the horses come off the range right now, all grazing animals come off the range right now, it wouldn't return to its previous condition because of the damage that's been done. So a lot of this is kind of triage and trying to stop the bleeding, so to speak, before it gets any worse.
So is there more of a willingness to look at some of these issues? Jumping down to the other end on policy, I've not ever actually heard acknowledgments of saying we need the tools back to be able to sell them outright. That has never ever come up publicly from the BLM, but it was part of two presentations today.
Well, it's very important for us to have the full suite of tools in order for us to do the job that Congress gave us in the 1971 Wild Horse and Burro Act. And I think we're kind of at a precipice. I mean, we talked about range conditions, and if we do not acknowledge the fact that horse numbers are too high and that we have to take some active management, the situation is just going to get completely, it's so out of kilter now that we can't sustain it.
Well, 2 years ago, JJ, when you were last on this show, we were still way out in numbers, and from the BLM's part, this really wasn't part of their public dialogue. It was we have tools. We're not allowed to sell outright. We're not allowed to engage in euthanasia. Has things changed with the herds as well?
Well, things have changed not only with the herds. We're starting to see some dramatic body condition changes in some of these horses. They're very thin. We are seeing some die-offs of horses in some places late in the summer. But all the other species that are out there, we've started to see some significant changes in as well. Our wildlife is being impacted by the overpopulation of wild horses out there. We have warned about this for 20, 25 years, and we are now finally really starting to see that. And I think that's what's changing this conversation today.
So what's a good range? I mean, how many animals should be out there? That's my question. What do you think?
Well, I'll jump in first. I think let's get to where we're supposed to be currently, and then we can have a conversation about whether that's still too many. I think it's kind of an academic argument or a pointless argument to argue, is the 27,000, which is the high AML, is that too many or not enough? I think the conversation should be, let's get them to AML, and then we can reevaluate whether we need to go lower, or maybe we can handle a few more, but we can't even have that conversation until we get there. In Utah, we have not ever been at AML since the 90s. So we've never been to AML since the 90s. So we don't even know what it looks like to be at AML.
And I would agree with Eric. We have to get to AML, but most likely we're probably going to see some number changes up and down perhaps in some areas, because the ecological sites have changed since 1971. Where those 27,000 horses were in 1971, I don't think we can carry 27,000 horses in those identical places again today
because the range has been too destroyed.
Range deterioration and a lot of it.
This is a good place to hold. I want to come back and address, can we actually accomplish this if we're like 60,000 horses over AML? We'll take a break on the county seat. We'll be right back.
What would you do with an extra day in Utah Valley? Explore the Wasatch Mountains? Snap a family photo at Bridal Veil Falls. Cool off on Utah Lake or the Provo River. No matter what you're searching for, you can find it in Utah Valley. Bring everyone together.
ATV? Check. Four-wheel driving? Check. Bouldering? Check. Mountain biking? Check. Hiking? Check. River rafting? Check. Adventure is about more than just crossing activities off of a list, but hey, if you can find a place that gives you everything you're looking for, all the better. In Emery County, you'll find the San Rafael swell, trails, lakes, and the small-town hospitality you're looking for. San Rafael Country, in the heart of Utah. Visit us and check something off your list.
Welcome back to the county seat. We are talking today about the wild horse and burro situation. A recent summit in Salt Lake City brought all the people together, all the players, put the best minds together, working on a solution. So I want to start, I've got two questions I really want to get in this segment. And John, here's the first one. You got 60,000 too many horses out there, not even counting Indian lands, not even counting what's in the pastures. Can we actually do this?
We have to. So the question is how, and I think that's what this summit has been about, is to try and have the dialogue and to look at options, look at finding those ways. How do we work together to come up with solutions to dealing with 60,000 horses?
So I understand that the intent is right, but I'm going to be honest with you. You live in an environment with an agency that likes static things, not dynamic. And from what I'm hearing, this is going to require being very dynamic on the range and how we handle things, because you've got population shifting around, and I mean, you got a lot of variables on the ground, including drought, weather, and everything else. So how do you make that shift?
You know, for the agency, we have to go back to some of our foundational principles. We have to go back to the Wild Horse and Burro Act itself, which talked about management. We have to go back to FLTMA, the Federal Land Policy Management Act, because that also gives us direction on management. And so if we get back to our foundational purpose, our mission, if you will, then that tells us we need to be managing. And that's where we have to go. That's what we have to do. We have to focus on those foundational principles.
Those are really tough. I mean, if you go and you read the 1971 Act, it talks about excess horses being sold outright or euthanasia. It talks about things that are currently really unpopular, but I don't know, I mean, I don't know if, aren't those going to have to be in the toolbox to work?
You know, I think they are. They're going to have to be in the toolbox. Excuse me. Other ways of curbing our reproductive growth are going to have to be in the toolbox. We need to get down to AML. That means we're going to have to find that capacity off range to get there. And that's going to require some additional tools that currently are not palatable today. But I ask everyone, is it palatable to allow these horses to starve, to die for lack of water, and to allow all the other resources out there to suffer the same consequences? Because the horse is the last one to show that. We're going to have to take some unpleasant steps if we're ever going to get this. Every day we wait, it becomes more and more unpleasant.
So, Eric, looking at the range conditions, are the advocates that say we've got to protect the horses at all costs, give them all the range, do whatever has to, you know, are they being unrealistic and looking at what the range can sustain?
I can't speak for them directly, but what I can speak to is with an animal that has a 20% growth rate, even if all of the cattle come off the range, that's a lot of the conflict now is, well, let's take more cattle off and put more horses on. That really doesn't address the problem, because we'll just add more horses to more land, and we'll still end up, we're not really solving any problems with that, because we still have a species that's non-native. There's no ecological regulatory mechanisms to control population, so that's really not a solution, is what I'm trying to say. That's in the short term, you may have a few more, you might be able to have more animals, but it'll just exacerbate the problem.
But Eric, maybe you want to touch on, as a range scientist, what happens to those remaining ecological sites that are still intact and maybe a little functioning at risk?
Well, and I should have finished, because what that means is you're now spreading the problem. Right now we have, you know, like in Utah, we have 19 wild horse management areas. If we just took the boundaries off those and let the horses go where they wanted, we would just expand those problems to a broader cross-section of the range. So, which would ultimately lead to more rangeland degradation and more of the same issues that we're dealing with now. So it's not a solution.
Well, the advocates only look at it from saying, well, we got to get the cattle guys off because we all should be vegetarians anyway. I mean, that kind of seems like the argument.
So what happens to the wildlife in those cases? We're still forgetting we have native wildlife. This is an introduced species, the horse, and we have native wildlife. They're being pushed onto our private property in so many places across the West already, where the horses are forcing them off of these ecosystems. That's only going to continue. You can remove all of the domestic livestock from public lands. Those livestock, or excuse me, that wildlife is then the next species that's going to suffer.
I think that's the one thing that's often not brought up. They've polarized the argument to, you know, would you rather have horses than cows on the range, which to a lot of people may sound appealing, but that's completely discounting the fact that it would lead to widespread loss of wildlife and wildlife habitat that are also very important to people.
And we're not just talking about elk here, are we? I mean, we're talking birds, we're talking Audubon Society, we're talking all kinds of things.
It's multiple use. I mean, and that's John's agency's mission, if you will, is multiple use.
You know, the presentation that Brock McMillan from BYU gave today illustrates this point perfectly. You know, even with songbirds, which they don't live on the ground with horses, right? You would think he saw more than 50% reduction in the numbers of birds around water holes where horses were versus where horses were excluded. So the point is they have an impact on everything else in those systems. And we've largely ignored the impacts to wildlife up to this point because that's not been part of the discussion, which I think needs to be part of the discussion.
I take you back quickly to the Wild Horse and Burro Act, where it tells us to maintain a thriving ecological balance, and a balance of all the uses that are out there, not just the horse or the burro.
See, now that's something I don't think I would have heard from your agency a year and a half ago or 2 years ago.
And it's a natural ecological balance as well. You know, what's naturally there. We don't want to supplement with additional water sources or haul water or those types of things to do what Eric said, put the problem somewhere else.
Well, okay, so there are going to be those who say, oh yeah, but the horse is a native species. It started in the North American continent in the prehistoric times. And so now it's not native because it moved to Europe and it's come back. I've heard people make this argument.
They have. One of the presenters today actually addressed that. The horse that evolved here on North America went extinct over 10,000 years ago. Gone. So these horses.
So did all its predators then, I suppose.
That's a large part of it, is the that was Ice Age stuff. A lot of things changed. So the horses that are here today are of Spanish and European descent, and they're not related to those original horses.
Okay, John, question for you, very short answer. Are you equipped with the tools you need right now, or are your hands tied as an agency?
We have a lot of tools, and what we need right now is a full suite of tools, and then we need the partnership with the state and local governments and the people that live on the ground to help us accomplish
But could
things.
you do that? Could you do that today? Could you implement an outright sale and a euthanasia policy?
No, we need assistance from Congress.
Okay, well, we're going to take a break. We're going to address that issue when we come back. Right here on the county seat, we're talking about wild horse and burros. We're kind of doing an update. It's a very interesting conversation, and there's a dynamic in this conference I have never seen before. We'll be right back.
There's a little place on a Utah map where I was raised, where my heart's at, where the sagebrush grows wild and high, and the stars come out at night. Oh, there ain't nothing like being raised in the basin with a Ute reservation, skiing starvation, that Duchesne County life.
The Utah Farm Bureau began as a collection of farmers supporting each other to raise the food we enjoy. Today, Farm Bureau membership encompasses everyone, whether ranchers, growers, or just everyday folks like you and me. Members enjoy discounts on items like vehicles and ATVs, or insurance that's very affordable. You don't have to be a farmer to join, and dues are small, but together we make a big difference in keeping our food supply local and abundant. Join Utah Farm Bureau.
In a place that is beyond words, there is nothing to be said, except take your time in Bryce Canyon country.
Welcome back to the county seat. We we took the gauntlet seriously about Congress needing to do something, so we have substituted John for this last segment with Clay White, who is the Assistant Legislative Director for Representative Chris Stewart out of Utah. You know, Clay, we're going to start this by just saying ball's in your court. The BLM has said, you guys have got to make something happen in Congress. Is this even possible right now?
Well, thanks for having me on, Chad. And the previous guest, John, was absolutely right. You know, let me be very clear. This is a congressionally created problem. The BLM does not have all the tools in their toolbox that they were meant to have from the 1971 Act. Congress has taken many of those tools away and not allowed them to use those. So we've been working on addressing this problem since Mr. Stewart came into Congress. He's become known as the wild horse guy. He holds up pictures every year in Appropriations Committee, because that's where this rider prevents the wild horses and burros from having additional management tools, prevents the BLM from additional management tools. But to answer your question, I think it is possible. We've moved the ball inch by inch. You know, we'll take a first down instead of a touchdown. But
yeah, well, but here's I mean, to be quite frank, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot, Clay, but if you listen to these two, we don't have time to do a 1st and 10. I mean, it's almost got to be a Hail Mary at this point, because if it takes another 20 years to get those tools put back, there's not going to be any range left.
Absolutely, and I 100% agree with that. We are at a tipping point, and unfortunately, that's when Congress acts, is when their backs are against a wall. We tend to not do anything proactively. We tend to do things at midnight before it runs out of time.
So Clay, you guys have been very helpful in Congressman Stewart's office and Congressman Stewart and some others across the West. But what do we need to do, those of us on the ground who are really seeing this day to day, the ecological damage, the damage to the horses themselves, the death to the horses? How do we need to reach out to those others in Congress and make them understand just how significant this is today?
That is our biggest hurdle we have to cross. Members of Congress on both sides of the aisle don't fully understand this problem. This is a Western issue that is out of sight and out of mind to most members of Congress.
So what do you hit him with? Do you hit him with the $1 billion it's going to take to keep these horses in pastures?
Absolutely. The cost, the inhumane treatment that the animals are receiving currently on the range, where they are starving to death. We have scientific-based evidence. This horse conference was a great illustration of that, and that's what I'm saying, that our partners on our side of the aisle and the other side of the aisle are starting to come around. Mr. Stewart was successful in giving the BLM more tools this past July in the appropriations process, and we're hopeful that will be in the end of the year spending package.
Okay, 3, 4, 5 years ago, I think, when we first did our very first county seat on this issue, I was scolded for bringing up slaughter. I said the word, and it was just like, I got scolded, even by panelists. You can't say that. Are we at the point where that is, to me, it seems like it's a solution we really have to look at, is just opening stuff up for commercial sale again?
Well, it depends on your definition of slaughter. It really does. Mr. Stewart's amendment will still prohibit slaughter for commercial or human consumption, but it will allow the BLM to euthanize excess horses. That is a tool that they have not had in their tool bag for decades. So when I say we're making progress, those are some of the things that we're making progress. Granted, they are not all the tools, but we had to realize the political reality. And we got our friends on the other side of the aisle to agree with us. They didn't oppose Mr. Stewart's amendment. They said, we won't vote against it, and it received technically a unanimous vote because there was no recorded vote called.
Well, I guarantee you, I will get emails about this, but we are at a point where something needs to happen. I'm asking everybody who watches this show, this is one you really need to get involved in, and you need to start making your point known that we need to do something about this. Give Congress the courage through representatives to do what they need to do to change the policy to make things happen. Share this with your friends, share it on social media. We have to get these pictures and this dialogue out to everybody. So do that, and we'll catch you next week on the County Seat.